In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was a little-known politician running for president. In February of that year, he was in New York City to deliver a speech at the Cooper Union Building. Just before his remarks, Lincoln stopped by the office of photographer Matthew Brady. There, Brady took a photo of Lincoln to mark the occasion of the speech. At Cooper Union, Lincoln then delivered a rousing address where he strongly opposed the extension of slavery. Within weeks, the photograph and the speech were printed in magazines and newspapers across the country. Although awkward and gangly in real life, the photo depicted Lincoln in a statesman-like pose. This was the first time Americans were introduced to the obscure rail splitter from Illinois. By the end of the year, Lincoln had won the presidency of the United States. Later, Lincoln said, quote, "Brady and the Cooper Union speech made me president." Stories like these demonstrate the power that photographers have over us and over history. Sometimes, all we remember about a historical event or figure is a single image. Think about World War II in the Pacific, and you might picture the famous image of soldiers putting up the flag on Iwo Jima. But what about the person behind the camera? Who are they, and what is it like to document history? How do you capture an iconic image? Well, we are pleased to have one such individual as our guest. His name is Bob Knudsen, and he's taken thousands of photographs over the years of many prominent people. And his father, Robert Knudsen, was one of the first official White House photographers, serving 6 presidents and capturing many iconic moments. We'll explore his and his father's stories on this episode of This American President. Perspectives. Bob Knudsen on photographing the president. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you. As you said, it's been a little while since we saw each other.
Yeah. If you could just tell us about kind of, your family background and all of that. I mean, we talked for a few minutes, but other than the fact that, you guys have these amazing stories, I know nothing about you. So.
Well, I tell you, I'll start with Dad.
Sure.
He was born in Storm Lake, Iowa, lived in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay.
His dad was a timekeeper. The head timekeeper for Union Pacific Railroad, and got to meet all kinds of people and all this. And in fact, one of them they got to know pretty well. And that's one of the pictures I sent you that you probably looked at it and go, what is that strange picture? And so they got to know this guy pretty good, and he ended up taking my dad and his sisters to school sometimes.
Okay.
But the only picture we can find of him is when he was about 2 years old, and this man that they had met was holding Dad right in front of some bushes in front of their house and all this. Mm-hmm. Well, he kind of looks like a gangster.
Like a mafia
type guy or things like this. But
did John Dillinger hold your dad
wasn't
when he was
John Dillinger.
Okay.
No, the other famous guy from Chicago.
Probably
the most famous gangster
Al
there.
Capone?
Al Capone.
Al Capone?
No way.
That's Al Capone holding Dad.
Your dad?
Yeah.
This is like Forrest Gump.
It's
basically. I mean, wow. So what was the story?
So he was a family friend. Just got to know my grandfather riding back and forth on the trains.
Your family was family friends with Al Capone.
Yeah, he even used him as a alibi a couple times.
Al Capone
used
your
my
family?
grandfather and grandmother as alibis.
But your dad got past the background checks for presidential photographer
Somehow,
with that?
once he graduated high school, he decided he wanted to join the Navy.
Then
and he
Wow.
got in, and that was his in.
That was it.
Wow.
Yeah, so Dad started from a colorful background without us even knowing it.
Oh my
until we
gosh.
found that picture and asked him, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that's Al Capone."
Huh. Okay. Yeah. When we had breakfast, your mob connections didn't come up, I guess. So
It's probably the company that we were in. We just wanted to
True.
do that. So,
Okay.
Anyway, Dad went to Naval Photographic School, graduated.
Do you have that photo?
We do
Al
have that
okay.
photo.
I don't know if. Okay.
Let's see. There's Dad and Al Capone.
That's Al Capone with your father.
That's Scarface himself.
So that is Scarface. So that means that we are 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees away from Al Capone. right?
Exactly.
We're all
But I
4
don't have a
degrees
trench
away.
coat on either.
Right. Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, that was great. So
Navy photography school.
Exactly. So he did that. The Secretary of Navy needed somebody up here, so my dad was sent up here to cover him.
okay.
And when he was on a yacht trip with, it was the Meriwether Post yacht with Secretary Brown, then President Truman was invited on board, and Dad took a few pictures of this and that, and they gave him the pictures, and President Truman said, I could use a man like that who's familiar with the new color photography. He said, I like the way he gets around. He said, I need someone to take a good picture of my wife and daughter and to record some historical events. And so naturally, the Secretary of Navy said, Mr. President, he's at your disposal whenever you need him.
Right. Wow.
And so that's how Dad started out on a call-in basis with President Truman. Then moved into Eisenhower, and he continued on there. And the Navy thought that they knew best. Dad was an enlisted man, and they didn't think it was right at the time for an enlisted man to be having personal contact with the President of the United States. So they decided, with their ultimate wisdom, my dad had never been on a overseas tour. So they sent him to Guam without telling the President. And the story, as it got back to us, went something like President Eisenhower was going, "Where's Knudsen?" "Oh, he's away on travel right now." A couple months later, "Where's Knudsen?" "He's still on travel, but so-and-so was going to take your place or his place." And
They wanted your dad.
Eisenhower said, he put his general's hat on and said, "I want to know where the hell Knudsen is right now."
Right.
And he said, "Well, he's in Guam." And he got the story, and he said, "I'll tell you what." He was talking to the naval attaché, or the naval aide right there. He said, "If you don't get Knudsen back here in 1 week, I'm going to send you someplace that no one's ever heard of before." So he brought Dad back on a Navy fighter plane. We had to wait for the next slow banana boat from Guam to California, and then drive all the way across the United States just with my mom. And from there, the President said, "I want you on call, a little bit quicker. So why don't you find an office, someplace that you can stay in the White House right here?" So Dad did. He picked out an old storage closet right in the West Wing, right at the bottom of the steps that leads up to the Oval Office.
Yeah.
And turned it into a photo office. And today, it's still
the photo office.
It's been expanded, knocked down a few walls, but it's still the original photo office that my dad picked out.
And I mean,
Did he-
in the 50s.
Oh, sorry.
Set up his own darkroom there, or
No, he didn't set up his own darkroom. He had the White House had their own darkroom that was modern and everything over in Anacostia Naval Center, which is now the joint base.
joint base.
Interesting.
Bowling.
So that's where they'd send all the film to get it processed, and that's how Dad's career got started and how he got stationed right in the White House and continued on with Kennedy.
So it sounds like there wasn't a White House photo office before that, or at least an official, an established one.
No, there was no photo office.
Your dad was the first.
My dad was the first of modern times. Now, earlier presidents had somebody that they brought in to be their photographer, but President Truman didn't think it was right that the American public should be paying for a photographer because he was very frugal and he drove his own car when he left the White House and everything like that. So Dad was the first official White House photographer of modern ages.
That's amazing.
And the longest serving 6 presidents.
Wow. How old was he when he started working for President Truman?
I'd have to count, but he was in his early 20s.
Early 20s,
Early 20s, and spent basically his entire career here.
Right.
He tried to retire, but at that time it was President Johnson.
Okay.
Wouldn't accept his retirement papers.
He was very persuasive.
He was very persuasive.
Right.
So finally they came to an arrangement that Dad signed civil service papers before he got out of the Navy, which you're not allowed to do. But
Exception.
The president.
The president said so.
He gets that's
right.
his calls.
So that's kind of how Dad's career got started right there. And, got to be real friendly with President Kennedy because President Kennedy liked him. He was a naval guy. And whenever the president went on a boat, went out on the water or something, he needed a qualified naval personnel So him and my dad got to be
out.
real good friends.
Because I was going to ask about that, if it was training from the naval photographic training, how that might have played in, or did that prepare him, do you think, pretty well? Or did he ever, was that like combat photo training? Was that the point of?
Well, there was a lot of combat photo training, but then Dad just had a natural eye to take, to frame up the image and the picture. And he was real good at moving around without bumping into things and calling attention to himself. And that's what allowed him or enabled him to stay there and do so many things.
He was invisible.
He was invisible. He was the fly on the wall during all these meetings and stuff like that.
Because that's how you get the photos of private meetings, right? Is the photographer gets to stay in there.
The photographer gets to stay in there. Even now, the photographer gets to stay in. Sometimes they ask the presidential photographer, they just give him the eyebrow and they go ahead and go out. But we've gotten to know and work with lots of other White House staff photographers, presidential photographers. In fact, if you count President Trump, I met him before he was president, then I've met 11 presidents.
Wow.
And I think that
is it everyone since Kennedy, basically?
Everyone since Kennedy.
Since Kennedy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Received my first birthday present from President Kennedy.
Huh.
He found out it was my birthday, and so he got this model of a Vanguard rocket, and gave it to my dad and said, "Here,
moon race.
Give this to your son.
That's
and
awesome.
Tell him happy birthday." So
do you still have it?
I do have it.
Oh, that's great. So, okay, how old were you when you met President Kennedy?
Boy, I was 9, 8.
9?
8,
okay.
yeah.
So
About 8.
what was that like? Because
You can remember that, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
I don't remember a lot about meeting President Kennedy because to me, it was just my dad's boss. We walked in the Oval Office, which we had walked in many times before, and there was a man there. And he goes in his accent, "Hi, nice to meet you."
Right.
So, and then asked me a couple of questions. Then we went back with my Boy Scout troop, and he came out and said hi to everybody.
Oh.
And other than that, I was born and raised in the White House. I mean,
yeah.
when Dad came home and said, "Do you want to go to camp for the weekend?" That was Camp David.
Right.
I thought everybody went to Camp David. And I don't think
amazing.
I really realized it till I was about 15 years old that
This isn't normal.
when everybody went to get on an airplane, they didn't all go to Andrews Air Force Base and just get on the plane and fly here, there. We did all of the Kennedy family photos down at either Ethel's house or Ted Kennedy's house.
So you'd go down to Hickory Hill and
We'd go there all the time. We recorded virtually every event that happened there up until I continued up until the early 2000s.
Oh, wow. So you know the family, the Kennedy family.
We knew the Kennedy family pretty well.
Okay.
And
wow.
it was unique. And I'd take pictures into Ted Kennedy, as I did other people.
Sure.
Senator Inouye from Hawaii.
Right.
Had some pictures of him showing President Kennedy around the USS Arizona.
Wow.
And so at an AUSA event, and I had an opportunity to talk to him a little bit more, and I made some copies of these pictures, and I gave them to him.
Sorry, when
afterwards.
you say him, you're talking
to
about
the senator.
Senator Ted Kennedy.
Senator Inouye.
Oh, Senator Inouye.
And
Okay.
I asked him,
Okay.
"Can you tell me, what it was like for you to show President Kennedy around?"
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at these and he said, "Wow, these are amazing." He said, "Some of these I've never seen before." And I said, "Well, can you just tell me a little bit about what you do remember?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "I was so scared to meet the President of the United States." He said afterwards, "I don't remember anything that I said to him."
Yeah.
And
right.
so he,
Sure.
that's what I tried to do with some of the other pictures. And Dad would, when we were on jobs, he'd always talk about, I'd ask him some questions about the pictures, and that's how he related some of the stories about the different pictures.
Right, right. So was your dad into photography before he joined the Navy? Was that...
He had an interest in it.
Okay.
He had an interest in it. Back then, basically the cameras were the 126s and the 4x5s and all that stuff.
Okay.
Not something that everybody'd play around with. So Dad had box cameras before that. But then when he went to Naval Photo School, then
That's where he picked up
That's where he picked up the trade.
Wow. Okay.
Continued on from there.
And he rode it to the White House.
He rode it all the way to the White House.
Right. Could you talk about just what the day-to-day was like for your dad? I mean, just what is it like to photograph the most important person on the planet? If there is such a thing as a normal day.
Dad, I guess Dad said that in the beginning he was a little bit nervous and very conscientious working around the president. Mm-hmm. But as he got more used to it and everyone got used to him, he said it's just a normal job. He said, you know what you're supposed to do, and you go in there and do it. Mm-hmm. He did travel a lot. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, like on Memorial Day back with President Eisenhower, President Eisenhower was taking his family out on their family boats, and they were taking him down the Potomac just for a fun time on. So Dad went along with him, and that's how we got some of those really unique pictures of the Eisenhowers and all the kids fishing, and the president's kind of I don't know if you had a chance to see that particular one where the president's fishing with his two grandkids. And I think that Susie catches the first fish. He looks at it. And then David catches a fish. And then the next picture, Susie has a fish on there again. And the president says, here, let me help you with that. Takes it, reels it in, turns around, and has my dad take a picture of him catching the fish.
Funny. That's funny. Always cultivating the image, I guess, right?
Exactly. So he did that, and so Dad was away a lot of times, and so he'd come back and say, "What were you doing?" or "What's Dad doing?"
Sure.
And so some things he could tell us about, and others he couldn't.
Right.
And so it was interesting as we grew older. Then we learned more stories, more history, but still we could go to the White House whenever we wanted. We had a parking place right there on West Executive Avenue.
Yeah.
My uncle was a lieutenant on the White House police force too.
Oh, wow. The whole family.
And so everyone knew that. So we just basically show up at the gate. I want to go see my dad.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And we go in, and they know us. And at that time, you could do that.
Right.
When you were saying before that he was telling you not, your dad recommended not, he said you have to learn not to direct them in the photo and to really kind of capture those moments. But that there's also a lot of, he's really then kind of seeing, like, it's what he sees and how he's presenting these people. Was there sort of a sense of a back and forth of like in what way your dad was presenting them by the manner in which he took photos, their consciousness of that, or whether it was...
Yes, there was. Each president has his own likeness of which side he likes to be photographed and how they like to be photographed, when. And as the White House staff photographer or presidential photographer, you need to know those things. And you get to know them in the beginning when you work with them and you show them the pictures. You say, I like this one. Sometimes they'd X them out. Sometimes they'd tell you what they liked. And then you'd pick up, back when there was film, then there would usually be a day lapse between the time. And so the president would look at the proofs or something and say, not this one, they don't like this, they don't like that angle. So you got to remember those things. Once you remember what the president wants to show in the pictures, then the most important part of the camera is 6 inches behind the focal plane. And that's your brain, just to remember everything. And that's your job as a photographer, to do that. And Dad had a unique knack to be able to know what each person wanted and capture it in that way. And that's what enabled him to stay there so long and be trusted to do so many events.
By so many different presidents. Yeah. Exactly,
because President Kennedy and President Johnson,
very different people.
Pretty different people.
Yep. Yeah.
The president was very warm and cordial. And
which one?
President Kennedy was very warm and cordial.
Okay.
And as everybody knows, President Johnson might not have been President Kennedy's first pick, but it filled the ticket. And I tell you, President Johnson, not only did he have a political head on his shoulders, but his wife, Lady Bird, she really directed the scenes and told him, this is what you have to do. This. And so some of those pictures right there, Vice President Johnson, he wanted to get in and to be more accepted by the Kennedys. So he came up with an idea that Caroline loves ponies and horses. So he would get a pony from his ranch and bring it up there. And his whole family, he had Linda Bird and Lucy Bird and Lady Bird.
The daughters,
and everybody out there. And they presented a pony to Caroline. And that's in those pictures right there. It's a picture of Caroline just standing there with her hands holding them behind her back, looking up at the pony. The next picture is Jackie is holding her arm up, having her pet the pony.
Oh, she's like terrified of it.
Well, that was a good idea. The way to get through the president is through the kids.
Sure, yeah.
And so it's a great idea, but she already had a pony. Macaroni was its name. And there was no second pony.
Oh, right.
And she only wanted Macaroni. So
this is an imposter pony, basically.
It was a birthday gift gone bad. And no one ever knew that. None of the press wrote about it. You never hear about those stories.
Sure, right.
And when we look back and reminisce through these pictures, it might look like just a regular picture of the family standing around petting a horse. Caroline's afraid of the horse. No, she didn't like the horse. She already had
she
her
didn't
horse.
Right, yeah. She picked up on that. She knew there was an agenda there,
and
apparently.
A lot of the foreign leaders knew this too. The best way to get to the presidents was through their family. Not so much give them a present, but to give their kids a present. And so the King of Morocco gave Caroline a real ornate saddle. She liked that. She brought
for
it up.
macaroni.
She could use that
for
for
macaroni.
Yeah.
She brought it up there, and there's the picture of the family putting on the saddle on macaroni. A very ornate, really pretty. And that's how they did it back then. They did that. I mean, there was one president I remember that was given to a president. It was given to President Nixon by Brezhnev. They got along so well. I mean, they would talk to each other. Yeah, we were enemies. Our countries were enemies. But he got along, and he knew the president liked sports and this and that. So Brezhnev sent him a speedboat. There was a hydrofoil speedboat that this country had never seen before. And so we have the picture of them riding around in the speedboat, and President Nixon was able to drive it.
Wow.
And then turned it over to the State Department for for resale. So I don't know whatever happened to it, but we have a picture of him driving it.
Wow. So. Yeah, all these presidents have this public image. You know, Harry Truman was this feisty Midwesterner, and Eisenhower was this grandfather, and so on and so forth. And you know, books are always trying to deconstruct them. For someone that, you know, was close to them, that you had met them and your dad knew them so well, I mean, which presidents, and maybe you can talk about this through stories or something, but which presidents are perceived correctly or not correctly? And, you know, because there's always, and part of it is the president cultivating his own image, you know?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. You know,
and you can start with Truman or whoever.
Well, Truman, Midwestern, very conservative. I mean, he didn't want to, you know, do things in a big way. The biggest thing that he did was go down to Fort Lauderdale, down to the White House, and he created a little White House down there. And they called it the Little White House, or the Florida White. I mean, that was his elaborate idea of a trip to go down there and go fishing. And so he'd had 15, 20 fish in front of him. And he'd do that. President Eisenhower, he had a general, I don't want to say mentality. He had a general public image, but also that of a loving grandfather. I mean, everything that he did, he let the grandkids be involved in. In fact, it goes back to Camp David. Just like everything else that the president named he'd name his favorite things after his grandkids. The Barbara Ann, the Susie Ann, and so on the boats. And then, Camp David was called Shangri-La. It was began by President, and so he didn't think that was a very presidential name. So what he did is he named it after his favorite grandson,
David.
Camp David.
Camp David.
And so that's why we have that picture of that little boy hanging from Camp David sign.
Okay.
That was David Eisenhower.
Oh, wow.
Hanging from the Camp David right after they put the new
the
sign
namesake
up. For
of the
namesake
place.
of it.
Yeah, okay.
And then moving on to Kennedy.
And he's always portrayed as so charismatic and everything like that. And, Nixon said he was actually quite shy and quiet. I don't know if that was...
He was more shy in some ways.
Okay.
And all this stuff. But, everybody knows he had a few girlfriends, and all that stuff. But his image was... he wanted to be very political. He wanted to be strong out there. And that's what his brother, Robert, helped him develop right there. That. But then when he got away, he loved to spend time with his family and doing things that he loved, like sailing. He would just as soon go sailing than anything. But then he also loved golf, but his back... His injuries to his back prevented him from playing golf all the time. But the pictures that we have of him with him and Jackie, and then it was Ben and Tony Bradley, I believe it was, they were playing golf. That was the last golf game that the president ever played.
Oh, wow.
That was in 1963, right there.
Right before.
And that was the end of September.
Wow. And I think... sorry.
That's why I put that in there. So, when he was... with friends and with his family, he was laid back and just enjoying things. He loved sports and all this, but again, going back to his injury, no one ever saw him in the hospital. No, that's one picture that they never wanted released or anything like that. But that's one picture that we have in our collection.
In the hospital.
Only picture of President Kennedy in the hospital with his back.
Really? Oh,
yeah. And
check that out.
People are sitting in there just talking with him, some of his friends.
Okay.
Smoking cigarettes. And all that.
When was that? When was that?
That was back in 1962.
1962? Okay. Huh.
Yeah, his back prevented him. As you can tell from some of the pictures, the first pictures of him coming out to get in the helicopter, he's carrying Caroline, and he's carrying John. That was for a very short time. After that, he was always holding their hand. And there's a reason for that. And the reason that he wasn't around horses more, like Jackie, was he was allergic to horses.
Oh,
and it drove him crazy. And a lot of people didn't realize, they just thought that, one thing or another, when they'd go up, then the president would always sit 20, 30 or so feet away while they were saddling up and while he was watching the kids ride and all that.
That's funny because in the movie JFK, there are these like short clips of him with the family, and there's a clip of him like with the kids and I guess Macaroni, and Macaroni's kind of like picking at his hair, and he's laughing, and it's this like really like cute family scene where he's just and he's picking on him and he's kind of like moving his head back, but I didn't, but he was allergic to them.
But then
so
after that clip, get that damn horse.
Right. Wash his hair or something.
And President Johnson, he was out there. He wanted to do things. He wanted to change the world. He did. He passed more legislation than I think any other, or signed more legislation than any other president. But he had a unique way of doing it. He knew where everyone's skeletons were in the closet. So if somebody didn't want, they said, "No, Mr. President, I'm not going to vote for this." He'd say, "Let me explain it another way. You know that funding that you want back home?
Right.
You want that money for that. Well, I want this too." And there's that famous picture of him with one of the reporters, they start out 3 feet away, then they're 1 foot away. And the next shot, the president is towering over him, about 6 inches away.
Right.
He was asking, do you understand what I mean now?
Right.
And so President Johnson was a pretty big guy. And, honestly, not saying anything new, he would try and intimidate you to do that. I mean, he got mad at my dad a few times. I think he fired him 5 times.
He fired your dad 5 times.
But the next day or later that afternoon, he would call him up. Knudsen, I need a picture. Mr. President, you fired me. No, I didn't. I was only kidding. And he'd send a gift to the house. And he said, I expect you in to work tomorrow morning or later this afternoon. And so he was always doing things like that. In fact, one time, it was Dad's birthday, and he finally had his birthday off in late November, or mid-November. And the president called him up on a Saturday and said, and he called him Chief. He said, Chief, get in here. I need a picture. And it was like, Mr. President, I'm off today. So-and-so is in on call today. No, he is not. I want you in here right now. Mr. President, I cannot come in today. I'm not feeling very good. I don't give a GD how you feel. I want you in here. And I want you in here now. Well, he didn't know that Lady Bird, my mom, had been planning a surprise party for my dad.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad left.
First lady.
Everybody came over, and we started setting up the house and all this stuff. Lady Bird came over. Linda and Chuck Robb came over, and the president held him there till like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My dad was just flying off the handle.
Oh, I'm sure.
And he didn't. He said, "Just wait." And he told him to wait in his office. And so finally he said, "Hey, I don't need you after all. You can go home." And so my dad walks in, and I think he took 3 or 4 steps inside the house before he realized that anybody else was there, and that they had said someone had said something like "surprise."
And President Johnson was there.
The President Johnson, I don't remember him being there, but Lady Bird
was there. Okay.
So the president helped pull off the surprise.
The president helped pull off the surprise.
That's great.
So, not many
See,
people can say that.
Yeah, your dad had a surprise party by President Johnson. Wow.
Yeah. And so, President Johnson had that way that when he wanted something, you'd get it.
Sure.
And President Nixon, he could have been one of our smartest presidents. I mean, he knew more about sports, everything in sports. He knew.
You don't hear much about that at all.
No, but
he played football.
If you look through the pictures, he played football. He wasn't a great or an outstanding player, but he really appreciated a good athlete. I mean, all these athletes would come over. In fact, he invited Olga Korbut and the Russian gymnastic team after she had scored a perfect 10. They invited them to the White House. He also invited all the race car drivers.
Oh, wow. He was a
time.
NASCAR fan?
It was in August of 72.
Okay. Now, I want to ask about Nixon, but going back to Johnson real fast, why did he fire your dad so many times? I mean, what's got
he would get upset at Dad for that picture doesn't make me look good or doesn't look good. You're fired. And his favorite, I guess his favorite words were GD, you're fired.
Wow.
And Dad didn't care. He'd leave.
Yeah.
And the first time he got fired, he cared.
Right.
But that was by President Kennedy.
So President Kennedy fired
President
him.
Kennedy started to fire Dad. That brings up that picture that we have of. You can tell it was taken from a boat way in a distance, and there's a man standing up on the rails of a dock. It looks like he's doing something. Well, now backing up, Dad was up there at the Kennedy compound, and Dad was entrusted with a lot of private moments, and he filmed a lot of home movies for the president. Well, one of them was scripted and directed that and they were acting it out on the dock where somebody comes up, and the reporter was out there in a boat with a telephoto lens trying to see what the heck was going on. So he went ahead and contrived something. The reporter.
Reporter, okay.
Yeah. The reporter saw this stuff happening, through binoculars, and took a picture and then blew it way up.
Okay.
And it was released in the papers that the president had a premonition of his own death, and had the White House, had it filmed the day before. That came out in the papers. And the only people there were the president, the people in the movie, and my dad. And so the president sent word for my dad to get right up there, and wouldn't let my dad say a word. He just showed him the newspaper and said, I can't believe, he just unceremoniously fired him, would not listen to him or anything, and told him, pack your bags, get out of here, I don't want to see you anymore.
Thinking he had spread the photos.
Thinking Dad had released information that night about what was going on.
Oh, wow.
The information in the paper was totally different than the scripted movie that the Dad had been filming for them.
Okay.
But the president didn't care. He said, he thought that happened. So when Dad was on his way was at the bar waiting for the car to take him to the airport, then this reporter said, hey, Knudsen, said, here, and tosses him an envelope, or slides him an envelope. And Dad opens it up, and here's this picture that was taken. And he says, I know what you were doing out there. And Dad goes, oh, son of a gun. This is how it got out. So he went back and gave the picture to the aide and said, tell the president I have to see him and show him something. So he went in and explained it, showed the president the picture, told him what had happened. And the president said, Chief, he said, I'm so glad to hear that, because he said, I trusted you so much with so many things. I couldn't believe that you would have done that. He said, thank you. Rest of the trip.
So let me see if I can... Okay, I just want to clarify the story that Bob was telling. Basically, Bob's father, Robert Knudsen, as the presidential photographer, was invited by the Kennedys while they were vacationing, and his job was essentially to take home movies of the Kennedy family, including President Kennedy. So obviously they trusted him a great deal to invite him with their family. And apparently during that trip, as his dad was taking footage of President Kennedy and his family, there was a photographer in a boat from a bit of a distance away, so the family couldn't see him, but he was able to take photographs of President Kennedy and his family. And those photos eventually got out and ended up in certain newspapers or publications, and President Kennedy was under the impression that Bob's father gave them information of some sort that allowed them to take those photos. And he was so upset about it, and to the president it was a violation of trust, that he fired his father. But later on, Bob's father basically obtained proof of some sort to show that he hadn't planned that, or he wasn't involved in them obtaining these photos later on. I mean, when he showed that to President Kennedy rehired him, and he said he was very relieved that, it wasn't true, that Bob's father didn't betray him or anything like that. And at some point in the, years after that, we're not exactly sure how long after that, but at some point after that, a newspaper, I don't know what newspaper it was, a newspaper took some of that footage and made it seem as if President Kennedy had predicted his own death. And in the home movie, there's a doctored image of President Kennedy on the ground pretending to be dead or pretending to be shot. And apparently that came from that incident. Those photos came from that incident. So that we're not exactly sure the timing of all that, but that's basically the gist of that story.
And so the reporter just said, the president must have dreamed that he was going to die, and he just wanted this filmed. And so that's what they put in the papers. And once that hit, everyone was
Sure.
trying to get my dad. Hey, what really happened? And this came out again in another book in the, I think the 80s, 70s, in the 80s.
Okay.
And we had so many reporters and news crews trying to get in touch with Dad and get,
Sure.
saying, "Is this true? Do you
Did he have a
film this? Did he
okay.
have a premonition of that?" And none of that's true.
None of
he,
that's
he didn't
true.
have a premonition or anything
It
like
was
that.
fake news.
It was fake news.
Yeah. Okay.
Did your dad get a lot of reporters or different people trying to get stories from him? Because he did have unparalleled access. He did know these things that were going on.
He did. He had a lot of people. In fact, everyone says, "Why didn't your dad ever write a book?" I know of 3 books that were started, but as soon as they started going down the back staircase, to say, or let's hear something really juicy. What really happened, on board this, what was really, then Dad said, that's it.
Sure.
Because he made a promise to the presidents that he wouldn't release that information.
Right. Yeah. That's very honorable. Now, President Nixon is always portrayed as, paranoid and all those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always thought that was very interesting because whenever he went on late night, there's a clip of him going on Jack Parr, and he's pretty funny. And he went on Laugh-In, and he's funny. But it's like uniformly considered that he was just this disturbed, guy. What did you encounter? Your dad encounter?
The Good Old Boy network was on its way out during the Nixon administration. During President Johnson, he still had control of everybody. I mean, they'd have a press briefing and say, "Okay, this is going to happen tomorrow, but don't you dare release it today." And I'll tell you when you can release it. Things like that. Nixon came in, a total new era, anti-establishment, rebellion, and President Nixon wanted to be perfect. He wanted everything that he did to be done right, and so he would practice things. He would get his speeches and go over them time after time and just make changes. In fact, he practiced Trisha's wedding in the White House 3 times, 3 rehearsals.
Wow.
He wanted everything to be done, and he kept notes on everything. So he could go back.
Obsessive
on that.
Yeah.
But then that was his downfall.
Perfectionist.
That he kept
That's
notes,
true.
tapes,
Yeah.
and everything
Wow.
on it. I mean, look at what he really did. He established a good relationship with USSR, with China. He brought back the prisoners. He was able to get so many POWs released from Vietnam. In fact, when he appreciated everybody. He wanted to throw parties for everybody. You had mentioned the Laugh-In. Yeah. He had Goldie Hawn, Michael Jackson, everybody perform at the White House. It was great. I mean, his daughters enjoyed that too. But then he also threw a party for the prisoners of war. And he invited all of them to come to the White House and set up the big tents on the lawn and had a special honorary celebration, celebrating their return, because they weren't, remember those times, what you read and all that, they really didn't welcome back. And so he wanted to show them how much he was appreciated. And in fact, one of the prisoners of war who came back had an idea that he didn't have a date to take to the special dinner, POW dinner. And he said that he always had a dream to have a date with a Playboy bunny, and was wondering if the White House could help arrange that date for them. And so the picture that we have in there that you're wondering about, this lady dressed in really big, nice dress.
Okay.
Nice dress. That's his date for the night.
A POW
got to take a Playboy bunny to the White House
during the Nixon presidency. That's funny.
A lot of things were changing.
One thing that the first time we talked, you brought up what your dad experienced during the Kennedy assassination. Just what that whole story. How was that?
I was in school, and of course, all the schools were let out, and I got home, and I was thinking to myself, this isn't real. This president hadn't been shot. It's
impossible to
fake
imagine.
news. Impossible to imagine for me back then. But I got home, and my mom was crying, and that was the first time I'd ever seen my dad crying. And I realized that had really happened. And so my dad was getting dressed, and I said, well, where are you going? The president's dead. What we found out, or what I got to know later, is that Dad, a week before the trip, was in talking with the president, and the president said, hey, Chief, why don't you take the next trip off? He said, I'm going to Florida and then running over to Texas to thank Lyndon for the votes and get ready for next election. Nothing's going to happen on this trip. He said, I'm just going to take Stoughton with me. And my dad said, Mr. President, I'm feeling good. He said, no, go enjoy, be with your family. So that's what my dad had been doing. He had spent the whole week with us. While or the few days is what it really was. And then when he was, President Kennedy was shot, then they contacted my dad and told him, meet us at Andrews Air Force Base. So Dad took those pictures and then over to the hospital. And
sorry, he took pictures at Andrews.
At Andrews of the casket being brought off.
Right. Okay.
Of Air Force One and of Jackie and the entourage coming off.
And these photos I've seen on covers of books and all, or in books. Okay. Yeah.
We'll stop right here because as the subtitle I put in here, it's the casket's arrival in an ambulance. I believe it was around 3 to 4 a.m. That morning. Jackie was in this car right here. The ambulance, it's a regular gray Navy ambulance that the president's casket was brought up to the White House in. And then this is the first picture of the casket being brought back into the White House after the autopsies, after they had conducted the autopsies at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And you can see that Jackie is still in the same dress that she had on, the blood-splattered outfit that she wore. And people asked her, let's change you and get you out of this. And you might have heard what her reply was. She said, no, I want them to see what they did to him. Him meaning the president.
Yeah.
And for your dad, I mean, they were, the relationship, it's not like an ordinary come in and do your job.
Dad,
being asked to go photograph an event like that of someone who's
Dad was away. He didn't come home for 3-4 days.
Wow.
Once he left that afternoon to meet the body, he was asked, to do some really, and things that and to see the president's head during the autopsy, and there's reportedly that there was a second set of autopsy pictures that were taken, but no one ever knew about them or anything like that. Well, Dad's the one who took them. He took the second set of autopsy pictures that had never been revealed or discussed or talked about or anything like that. And right after he got done taking those pictures, then the FBI, who was now in charge of the investigation and all the film, took Dad with the autopsy film that the corpsman had taken earlier, and with Dad's film, went over to the photo station in Anacostia, and him and another Navy personnel were the only ones in there. They processed, they developed all the film, then they made the prints, and they were told to make 8 copies of each. And they did that and put them in envelopes. And after they got done, they were completely searched. The whole lab was sterilized to make sure there were no test prints, no samples, nothing being smuggled out. And they had Dad hold all the pictures, and they escorted him back to the White House and had those those 8 bags of pictures dispersed right there at the White House. And that they would not be shown until 50 years or 20 years after the last surviving person, which would be Caroline, dies.
The autopsy photos.
Yeah, those pictures. But when they were researched in the National Archives and all this, there's only, I believe, 7 pictures
in there.
In the envelope that was given to the Warren Commission and all that.
Because those are the ones that are public then. Because there's a set that's public.
They've never been released.
The ones that your dad took.
The ones my dad took, or the ones that were taken that were shown to the Warren Commission and all that. You've seen pictures from there, but those are all photoshopped or doctored pictures.
The ones that the actual autopsy photos that are out
haven't. Those aren't the real ones.
So the ones that are out are fake.
They're fake.
They're totally fake.
Totally fake.
Wow.
Yeah. Dad told us that.
Because he saw.
He saw.
So he saw the ones that are out there, and that's
exactly.
Are they photos? Are they autopsy photos that have been faked, or are they just completely okay? So
they were somebody in a similar position in this and that, but the head wounds weren't the same.
They doctored those
things like that, and they just weren't the real ones.
Wow.
That have been released, because they were said that they would not be released until I think it's 20 years after the last person, which is Caroline, and Caroline's still living, so it's at least 20 years.
Until after
I think it's either 20 or 50. I don't remember the exact number right now. I'd have to look it in my notes and all that, but that's it. And then during the funeral, and then a shot from Arlington National Cemetery, the largest funeral ever held, right there. And then this is a children's birthday party right here. And President Johnson, John Jr., Caroline's birthdays are right there at the end of November. And
right after
they weren't able to have a birthday party, so President Johnson wanted Jacqueline and the family to stay in the White House till after they had a birthday party.
I see. Yeah.
Early December. Yeah. And so President Johnson wanted to throw a party for the kids, last party in the White House.
Lost their dad.
Gaps in the Kennedy Autopsy. That's some of the stuff that was written about my dad right there.
Can I ask, just what would your dad say about just that ordeal, the assassination? I mean, what were some of the? I mean, obviously it was very
he wouldn't talk about
tragic.
it. Yeah. He really wouldn't talk about it because he was sworn to secrecy of everything that he saw. In fact, when he was called before the Warren Commission, he wouldn't say anything, and until he was released to say a few things that he felt he could say, and his entire record was removed from the Warren Commission report. And 15 years later, when they did the review of the Warren Commission, they came back and they interviewed Dad, and they said, "Why weren't you called? Why weren't you interviewed?" He said, "I was." And said, "No, you weren't. Here's the list." And you weren't even on the witness list. But Dad had a copy of his subpoena. And they wouldn't give him the copy. And then after the review board interviewed Dad, then they said that they'd send him the transcripts later. They never sent Dad the transcripts. Back in, was it early 2000? I think it was. Our family was subpoenaed by the FBI to come in and talk about if we had any secret information about the autopsy or this and that, or any documents that we'd like to turn over to the time to help the story or anything like that.
Yeah.
And we gave them a little bit of information, but they said, we really don't believe too much of what you're saying right here. And then they said...
They said that to you?
They said that to us. And they said, "Here, we have something for you. And the reason that we don't believe what you're saying is we have this transcript for you. I said, what? And I said,
You never saw that. Yeah.
we've never seen that. And they
Yeah.
said, well, wait, do you recognize this? He said, yeah, that's my dad's name. No, the signature. I said, no, we don't recognize the signature. They said, that's your dad's signature. That's your dad's name. And that's the testimony that he gave. And we go, that's not dad's
his
signature. And so they had already given us these copies.
Okay.
So we have those. And a lot of the information in the transcript was wrong. They said make sure you go through the transcript if there's anybody's name misspelled, wrong addresses.
Okay.
Didn't even have our correct addresses of where we lived in it,
So
and all this.
it was made up? I mean, that's what it... Who knows?
We don't know what happened to
Who
it,
knows?
but all
Okay.
we know is that we have a transcript of what they said the dad talked about.
Okay.
And it was interesting, but Dad, up until his death, never
Talked about it.
revealed anything.
Do you think that changed the rest of his work, the future of his work with other presidents, just both his relationship with them, but even just his eye as a photographer after you've taken those type of photos?
Well, it's the type of pictures that Dad. I think that those are the only autopsy pictures he took, and I think the only reason he was asked to take them is because his relationship with the family, that they knew that
Could trust him.
could trust him. So the way that he took them and the amount of pictures, it played on Dad, a long time, a long time up until his death in '89.
I see.
Because he was closest with President Kennedy probably
Out of all the presidents.
than anybody else in that. And
I think when I read an article, I was Googling your father, and it talked about how he was there basically for Watergate, and I think he probably took some photos. Did he take the photos the day after when he actually resigned, or what? I think I saw something to that effect.
Yeah, I'll show you. The President Nixon wasn't. Everything he did was a little bit awkward, and it was real easy to catch him in the awkward pictures.
Can you go back? Sorry, this one looks awkward. What's happening there?
All he's doing is stepping over a bush,
And he just looks.
but he looks so awkward.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, and it's unfortunate that
Look, she looks not happy.
she goes, "Here, let me help you,"
Right,
and he goes,
right.
"No, I got it."
That's
funny. But he's running through the flowers. I mean,
That's
so-
funny.
yeah, and
So
so,
that was maybe a bit of a challenge to capture him.
to capture him not in
Looking
a
goofy. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
not in an unusual pose, but he was a jokester or prankster kind of. I mean, here's Brezhnev and
Nixon was
Nixon
a prankster.
talking. He
The
did,
jokester.
a jokester, which no one
Nobody-
I know.
really ever remembers or things like that. Now, right here, they're signing the nuclear proliferation.
ABM
Yeah.
or something. Salt.
Yeah. And President Nixon said, "Is this a legal document if I sign it Mickey Mouse?" And that's what he just said.
That's funny.
Now, you
Nixon.
didn't hear that on the press.
Right,
You didn't
sure.
hear him joking, but there, Brezhnev is looking over to see how he signed it. Right there. He's going,
Make sure
"What?"
he signed
And there's President
real
Nixon
name.
laughing his head off. He goes, "You did what?"
Wow. And this one's got
Yeah,
an
you had
interesting-
asked about. It's an interesting picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's Haldeman. This was after Watergate.
Okay.
This was right after the president decided to resign.
Wow.
And he made sure that the entire walkway, even the police, were clear. And he was coming from his office over in the EOB. He had been meeting with other people over there. He was coming back to the West Wing right there. And my dad was up in someone else's office talking with them, and he saw him coming down, and he just had a feeling that he should take that picture. So he shot it through a window, and this is President Nixon wiping the tears away as he walked back to the White House.
and he just happened to see that moment right
Well,
there.
he'd spent a
And
lifetime.
Dad knew the timing.
Knowing how
He
to.
knew the timing.
And always
that
had a
it
camera.
and it had to be an important picture. He just knew that it had to be, something. You thought, what would you think would be the wildest time during, which presidency do you think during my dad's era?
Wildest is in like
Strange
parties
things happening.
Well, I think people would have guessed Kennedy. I guess if you want to talk wild,
you would have thought there's Michael Jackson, Goldie Hawn, Sammy Davis Jr. There's everybody.
This has got to be a young Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm. Right there.
That's Michael.
That's Michael.
It is in the White House.
It's in the White House.
Wow.
Everyone came out there, and
Sammy Davis.
You never thought of him as the President Nixon having a good time.
Sure, yeah.
Out there in the
or
White House,
fraternizing with Hollywood or anything.
No, and that he got along with them. He loved them. He knew everybody.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And but no one thinks about that.
Well, no one ever hears that. They always think of
Overshadowed
by
Watergate and those
happy.
times. Yeah.
So how did he see his role? Like, I'm just there to document things, or I'm there to really help the president in what he's doing through my job.
When his position was the presidential photographer in the White House, staff photographer for the president, then his job was to record history for the president as the president wanted it recorded. As a White House staff and as a government in later years, then it was to record the history. But that was approved through the president. So it's kind of a catch-22, or, he had two roles: serve the president, but
document
history as almost as an outsider, not as like the view of.
In the early years, as the president wanted it seen. During Nixon, he documented the tapes. Dad had to take pictures of the White House, of them assembling, of all the boxes, of all the information and everything that was done. The microphone, the tape recorder, all of Dad's pictures were used to go over there to Watergate hearings and stuff like that. So that he was the government history recorder.
Which is really interesting because obviously, with the assassination and with Watergate, with these things where he's asked to just continue in his role, but as a person, he's kind of processing all of that at the same time. Other people, they may have lost or gained jobs or been able to kind of react in different ways, but his job is the same.
His did stay the same, and the way that the White House photography office and presidential photographers set up, no one will ever come close to serving as many presidents.
Sure, yeah.
On the official capacity as
Dad.
Dad.
It's usually one and done. They serve with that president. Yeah. Maybe another one,
back.
But
there were two. Pete Sousa did two.
Sousa,
the others before, Dad worked with some of them that served four. And that was as close as it got. But no one came close to the six that.
So, you said you've met President Trump before he was president. Can you talk about that? What that experience was like? What was the circumstance?
Yeah, he was speaking before a group.
Okay.
And I was back in the green room right there. The limos pulled up. It was unique because Mike Pence was with him too.
Oh, so
this was Pence and Trump were going to be speaking to the group, and
this was last year.
This was the end of last year.
Okay,
the end of last year, and he was going to do it. And he said, "I wanted to bring both the president, the next president, and the next vice president to show you how important you are, and to get pictures." So, because he said, you'll never get a chance to get your picture taken with the president and vice president. This is what he was telling the clients. And so they came up, one advance car, President Trump and Trump and Pence both got out of the same car. And then there was a follow-up car and then another police car. That's it. He comes back there and he comes into the room and he looks around. He goes, "Okay, what do you want?" Told him, we're going to do the pictures right here. He says, "Okay." He said, "How do I look?" I said, you look fine, I think. He said, do you have any? And then he saw the mirror, walked over, looked at the mirror, came out like this. And after we took a few pictures of him with some of the clients, he goes, come here, can I see him? And he looks at him and he goes, oh, I got to smile better than that. And that's when he started doing two thumbs up.
The thumbs
instead
up.
of, he was just holding one thumb up, and he goes,
instead of
that's
Bill
not
Clinton.
He started doing two thumbs up
Sure.
right then. And he wanted to talk to everybody and meet everybody. And every one of the police and fire department that were there wanted to meet and get their picture taken with each one of them. And I think he thanked every single first responder that went through the line.
Interesting.
Personally, I mean,
Yeah.
when they'd come up in 3 or 4, then he made sure that he thanked each one of them. So that was.
Were you there because you're like that
Special
organization's
events?
one of your clients?
Yes.
Or, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have tons of clients. I mean, you mentioned being on the Hill. I know you do photography for AUSA. Okay.
Yeah, for a lot of different clients. I started getting a little bit selective, and I don't want to travel as much anymore.
Gotcha.
I want to stay. And there's one other story that I haven't told that I have to tell.
Please tell.
Okay.
Perfect time.
This was, I was coming back from my normal plane ride on Air Force One from California.
Normal.
And
Normal,
I had seen these telephones there before, but I just thought, this phone happened to be sitting close by to me. And so, being a teenager, hello.
Uh-oh.
And a voice came on. Yes, sir. Who would you like to make a phone call to? I thought, the only thing I could think of was this phone number of this girl that I had been dating. It started
Oh my gosh.
And so I gave that, and I could hear them talking. And they said, you have a phone call from Air Force One. Please stand by. Who? Wait, who is calling? Who is this? I know this is a prank. And I heard it. I said, no, hey, it's me. Oh, they said it was Air Force One. And I said, well, I'm on Air Force One. And you got to remember, in the 70s, no mobile phones, no cellular service.
Yeah.
It's like, this was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, hey, can you come to Andrews and, pick me up? Well, I'm spending time with a girlfriend right now, and she's with me right now. So bring her along and just, wait for me. And, come up, tell me you're going to pick me up at the airport. And so,
With you looking so cool coming
Coming
from
out
the
of
getting
Air Force
off
One.
Air Force
Yeah,
One.
yeah.
And so I get down, I come down and I wave, And after everybody had deplaned, then they said that I could come back on, because I said, hey, can I show this girl? And he said, oh, yeah, trying to impress, young ladies. And so I did. I said, come on, let's go on. And so we went up the back staircase, and I showed him where I was sitting and the phone that I used and all that. And it impressed her so much that she ended up marrying me. And
That's
we've been married
awesome.
ever since.
That's awesome. So it worked, right?
It impressed her.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Well, I wish we could keep going, but this is great. Thank you so much. I love hearing about just, from people who've been there. It's one thing to read a book, and it's another thing to talk to someone who's lived it. And
to see a picture.
Yeah.
And to see a picture
those.
that backs it up, or to see the rest of the story behind it. It was my play. I enjoyed, the first time we met and talked. I enjoyed
Likewise, yeah.
talking to other people about that, and that's something I look forward to. And thank you very much for asking me to come here and share some of my stories and some of my dad's pictures and personal experiences.
So that's it for this week's episode. I love meeting people that have been there, met presidents, the stuff you see in the history books. When you open them and you look at it, it feels so distant and far away, but he, his father at least, but it sounds like he himself lived through a lot of it. And so that always really, it just, it makes it real.
It's so neat to get to hear that perspective from someone who was there, hear his father's stories from his firsthand experience.
Well, and, it's cool because, John F. Kennedy is like this American legend, but the way he talks about him, he's his dad's buddy. He was his boss, but he was his buddy, and apparently they were, he trusted him to hang out with them and take photos of them, home movies and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, with a lot of personal side of the presidency.
And I also loved the way he talked about Johnson. He talked about the story of him trying to win John F. Kennedy's favor, or, just to, I guess, be appreciated by him by winning over his kids, and giving this horse to
Macaroni.
Macaroni. Actually, Macaroni was the one they already owned. I think he gave him another one, and then it was like, oh, Macaroni, it's not the same as Macaroni, right? But the thing was, it was interesting because Johnson was known for being very insecure, and he wanted everyone to like him, and they say that was one of the downfalls of his presidency. Well, at the same time, this story is really consistent with that because it's about him trying to win over the Kennedys. He was, the Kennedys were wealthy and all that stuff, and Johnson was a poor boy, and he was insecure about that. And so that story really, it matches up with a lot of what I heard about Johnson. And then with Nixon, that was fascinating. Yeah, because Nixon, I have friends that just think he was this like sniveling ogre, right? But apparently, there are clips I've seen where he's actually really funny. And this story, he was hanging out with Hollywood people. He was hanging out with NASCAR people. He was, partying. Apparently, it was like a frat house from what he described. So, yeah, I thought that was fascinating. And it shows you that sometimes the perception we have is right and sometimes it can be totally wrong.
And it's not just hearing about those things. Not only is that someone who knew those presidents personally can give that perspective, but there's something unique about the relationship, it seems, of the photographer to the president.
Sure.
Because of their role, they have both a role in kind of helping the president maintain a certain public persona. Mm-hmm. They also have this kind of trusted relationship, almost, as you said, with Kennedy in particular. It sounded like almost a friendship, a lot of private moments, a lot of family memories. They're just someone that's always kind of there, but in an official capacity, but in one that's so different because they're entrusted with kind of the whole memory of that presidency, on the personal side and on the public side. And we were talking about, too, how they are present for so many world events, but they have to remain kind of invisible and off to the side, not interject themselves into any of these things while still being present for all of those. Right. So it's not only a first-person view of that president and many events that they are participating in, but it's like it's like a 360 view of that president in their personal life and their public life.
If you want to see some of the photographs we talked about today, go to our website, thisamericanpresident.com, or check out Bob's website, robertknudsenphoto.com. That's Robert, Knudsen, photo.com, to purchase any of his or his father's photos. This American President is produced by myself, Richard Lim, and Michael Neal, with creative consulting from Emily O'Connor. Special thanks to my dad, Bert Chu. The music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. If you like what you've been hearing on our podcast, you can help us grow by sharing an episode with your friends on Twitter or Facebook. You can also support us by going to patreon.com/thisamericanpresident. I'm Richard Lim. We're back next time with more This American President.